Okay.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Laura Gage, Marketing and PR Manager at the North East Automotive Alliance. Thank you for joining us for another of our webinars this morning. We're delighted to be joined by Life-Saving Training, who are going to provide us with some of the updates and some of the changes in relation to first aid, particularly with regards to the current situation we find ourselves in. So I'm very interested to hear about those kind of things as well, and obviously would encourage you all to make the most of asking any questions that you've got, because Life-Saving Training are the specialists in this field, so should hopefully be able to answer anything that you've got. So if you'd like to ask any questions, feel free to keep those towards the end or add them to the chat facility that we have, that we can then post to the team at the end. So without taking up further time, I'd like to hand over to Helena Sansom and Ian Blackburn of Life-Saving Training. Thanks, guys.
Thanks very much, Laura. Okay, so yes, welcome to our webinar called First Aid During COVID-19, during the pandemic at the moment. Oh, there we go. Bit of a delay on my keyboard. So just what we're going to be covering this morning, I'm going to give a quick introduction to who we are, but yeah, as Laura said, I'm Helena Sansom and this is Ian Blackburn. We've been running Life-Saving Training for 8 years, and we are volunteer mountain rescue medics as well. So what's the purpose of this session? We want to give you some information about updates to guidance from the HSE, as there have been some key changes that you need to know about to stay legally compliant regarding your first aid cover. The HSE have also provided some information around certificate extensions if you've not been able to requalify during this time, so we'll provide some clarity around that. Also, what your first aiders need to know in terms of how we actually treat casualties at the minute, because again, there have been some key changes. And then at the end, we've got a Q&A session. So yeah, as Laura says, if you've got any questions throughout, just make a note of them. Normally during face-to-face sessions, we welcome questions throughout, but over Zoom, I think it's just a little bit easier if you make a note of those, and then we'll address all of those at the end. So who are Life-Saving Training? So we're a health and safety training provider focused on first aid. We've been around for 8 years now, and we've accrued the highest number of 5-star Google reviews in the region, which we are proud of, and people seem to really dig what we do. We cover all aspects of first aid, but we do specialise in higher hazard sectors, for example, manufacturing, engineering, and remote environments as well. And we deliver tailored environment-specific first aid and pre-hospital care training that actually works in the real world. We empower people with the relevant skills and confidence to actually make a difference, that don't just get a piece of paper that they can stick up on their fridge. So we've got a very short video that we're just going to play next, just to give a little bit more of an overview of Life-Saving Training, and then we'll kick off with the content of the webinar.
All businesses need to consider their first aid training needs, but who wouldn't benefit from knowing how to help someone in need? Our training is accredited, works in the real world, and costs up to 40% less than the usual providers. Through our unique training, we create resourceful first aiders who have the skills and confidence to help in a real life situation. This is important because research tells us that up to 60% of people who do a normal first aid course don't have the confidence to help. We also know that 6 out of 10 people who die through injury in the UK die needlessly because a well-trained first aider with the confidence to help could have saved them. We're on a mission to help, to save lives and better protect your people. We'll make sure your business is fully compliant and will help you to mitigate risks. Check out the feedback from the hundreds of businesses who we've helped already, from SMEs to PLCs and global firms. So why not get in touch today to find out how we can protect your business, tailor your training needs to your environment, and bring confidence to your team. We are Life-Saving Training.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's get down to it then. So what I want to talk about first of all then is a little bit about kind of how many first aiders you might have at the moment, and whether that needs reviewing. So the HSE, the Health and Safety Executive, have said that really now is a really good time to be starting to review your first aid needs assessment. Depending on how many people you actually have in the workplace at this moment, you might actually be able to get away with far fewer first aiders than normal. So if you're only operating at sort of 20% capacity or something like that, then the number of first aiders that you might need on hand, might be fewer. So that's certainly something that you could consider. Depending on the type of work that you actually do, it might be that you can actually stop some of the higher risk activities that you're doing. So if you are at reduced capacity and perhaps you're just doing the more kind of admin-based tasks, perhaps you're doing the kind of run-of-the-mill stuff, then it might be that actually you don't need as many 3-day first aid at work first aiders on site at any time. The HSE have come up with an idea that they've suggested that if you're struggling to have enough first aid provision during the pandemic, you could even consider sharing your first aid cover with another business. Now, that's going to sort of depend on what your neighbours do. If you are kind of a high hazard engineering operation and your neighbours are offices, for example, it's very unlikely that the first aid provision that they'd be able to help you with is going to be acceptable, which makes sense. But if you're struggling to get enough first aiders back to the workplace at this point, it's certainly something that you can consider. Now, the HSE have definitely said that something that you need to make sure if you're going to go down that route is that the people who would be covering you with their first aid skills from another business, you need to make sure that they are going to be immediately available. So, you know, there's not a lot of point if they're going to take sort of 30 minutes to get to you. Equally, we need to be very sure that if they're leaving their current business to come and offer first aid assistance, should it be required for yourselves, well then actually we need to be very sure that they're not leaving their own premises without appropriate first aid cover. Now, because the HSE have sort of recognised that a lot of first aid courses that would normally be running haven't been running over the last sort of few months, it might have been that you've got people who would have normally tried to requalify since March and have been unable to just because of the lack of first aid courses running. Now, because of that, what they've said is that actually people who were still classed as a first aider in the workplace as of the 16th of March, well, if their certificate has come to an end, so it's expired, either on or after the 16th of March, then they may well be able to qualify for an extension. Now, they've put a couple of rules around this, which obviously makes sense. We've got to be sure that there was a good reason why you couldn't requalify. It's probably going to be quite easy to satisfy that, bearing in mind that a lot of first aid providers, ourselves included, haven't been running as many courses to requalify people, not surprisingly. You also need to, if asked, be able to explain to the HSE what steps you took to actually attempt to requalify your first aiders. So that might be that if you've actually contacted a few first aid providers, for example, and were told that you couldn't requalify because courses weren't running, then that would probably be enough to actually satisfy that requirement as well. The HSE have just the other day said that now they're pretty confident that enough first aid providers are kind of opening their doors again, ourselves included, to actually start running more and more courses. So they feel very confident of creating a final deadline now for requalification for all first aiders in the workplace, and that requalification deadline is the 30th of September. So what that means is that if you've got a number of first aiders who have qualifications, first aid qualifications, that were going to expire either on or after the 16th of March, they now have until the 30th of September to become fully requalified, to be classed as a first aider in the workplace. If you have anybody who has a qualification that's expired before the 16th of March, then as of the 16th of March, they can no longer be classed as a workplace first aider. The HSE have been very clear throughout, not just through COVID-19, but forever really, that recognised first aid training, it's got to be assessed face-to-face, and it cannot be delivered wholly online. So if anyone's ever been sort of tempted with these online offerings that you can find on the internet to become a first aider in 2 hours instead of the usual 18, for example, which is quite surprising. What isn't surprising is that they don't actually count for anything. So the HSE, just to repeat, suggests that you cannot do regulated, proper assessed first aid qualifications that are any good for the workplace that are delivered wholly online. So the way that we treat casualties has changed a little bit during the pandemic, which we could tell you all about, because Helena and I, as Helena mentioned, are both mountain rescue medics, and so kind of now we get dressed up looking like we're kind of going to go into a nuclear facility every time that we need to actually deal with a little cut that somebody might have. But there's a few things that even in the workplace you need to consider whilst we're actually doing some first aid. Now, the first thing that we're going to consider is that actually everyone's infected, because ultimately a lot of people may well be infected and might not actually be showing any symptoms. Wherever possible, we're always going to try and get casualties to help themselves. Okay, now, you'd be surprised what you can actually achieve by giving somebody who's ill or injured advice from 2 meters away. You know, if you throw a bandage at them and show them exactly what you're trying to achieve and get them to check their own capillary refill or anything like that, anything that a first aider should know, they can pass that information on, and it's remarkably effective actually.
And reassurance to a casualty can be given from a bit of a distance as well, and that goes a long, long way. Definitely, I'd agree with that. Now, if you've got PPE in the workplace, which a lot of workplaces have, then we can also use that throughout our first aid treatments. Fluid-resistant masks, that's kind of the standard that Public Health England are going for. It's certainly what we use, it's what we recommend. And they're pretty cheap, you know, you can buy them in packs of 50 for not very much at all. But the first aider having one on is really important. Equally as important, if at all possible, we could try and get one on the casualty as well, even before we try and approach. Eye protection, a lot of organisations that do kind of higher hazard activities are going to have eye protection anyway, so that could be safety goggles, it could be safety glasses, but just something really to try and stop any kind of fluid from getting into the eyes. Again, where possible, we could pop those onto a casualty as well. Gloves have always been a thing that we use in first aid. They're even more important at the moment. So, I mean, wearing first aid gloves during a first aid situation shouldn't really be sort of anything new for a first aider. Now, a lot of that can be quite easily achieved with a conscious casualty, because you can throw things at them, you can tell them what to do, you can tell them to put a mask on, you can tell them to put the goggles on that you've just sort of slid across the ground to them. Things can be a little bit more tricky when you've got an unconscious casualty. Now, if you've ever been on a first aid course, we should know that actually the first thing that we always assume or always consider in first aid is danger. Yeah, and that could be a whole host of things. And those usual dangers, yeah, poisonous gases, anything like that, those things haven't gone away. We still need to consider those at the danger stage. But now we've got this new danger called COVID-19. So we really need to be kind of considering that. And I think, as we've just mentioned, we're going to be trying to put some PPE on ourselves, which, you know, the logistics of that, it might be that actually your first aiders might need access to a mask, some goggles, and their normal gloves, kind of, you know, that they can sort of reach over and get them immediately, rather than having to do a 40-minute wander around a factory with a one-way system employed to go and get the things before they can actually go and help a casualty.
Response, how we get a response from a casualty is going to be the same. We're going to shout at them. We might give them a bit of a squeeze. Catastrophic bleeding, if someone's got blood hosing out of them, well, actually, if we don't sort of stop that from happening, then, within about 90 seconds, they might not be with us anyway. So everything else kind of goes out of the window. So that hasn't changed. Now, these are the things that have changed. Normally, after we've done danger response, we've looked for and dealt with any catastrophic bleeding, we'd then open the airway doing a simple head tilt chin lift. Now, the most up-to-date guidance currently is that we do not open the airway, so we do not do head tilt chin lift. Another change is when we do breathing. So again, normally after we've opened the airway, we would put our face or the side of our face very close to the casualties, and we'd be looking, listening and feeling for no more than 10 seconds. Now, it's really important that currently we don't put our face too close to a casualties for obvious reasons. So what we're going to do is we're just going to simply look and feel for signs of life or the absence of normal breathing. So things that we might be doing is we might be looking at the chest to see if we can see chest rise and fall. It might be that we even pop our hand on the diaphragm to see if there's any movement at all. Again, if you've been on a first aid course, vital sign information is going to be really important. So we're going to be looking at their colour and that kind of thing. So just to recap that, don't put your face over the face of a casualty to check for breathing. If they are breathing, fantastic. Circulation check. So we're going to look, see if they've got any blood coming out of them. We're going to do a damage check to see if they've got any broken legs, broken arms, broken spine, broken chest, broken head, broken neck, broken anything else. Before then putting them in a safe airway position, recovery position, soda position, whatever you're used to. So that's pretty standard. So the key changes there then, don't open the airway and don't check for breathing in the normal way. Now, when we do CPR, obviously that's for people who are not breathing. Now, during normal times, the best course of action for people who are not breathing would be to call 999. And then once we've done that, we get straight on the chest and we do 30 chest compressions. We then give them 2 breaths and we keep doing that. So 30 compressions, 2 breaths, 30 compressions, 2 breaths, and we keep going. Hopefully, if you've got a defibrillator in your workplace, then that should hopefully be brought quite quickly. And we're going to use the defibrillator. However, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the Resuscitation Council UK suggested a few modifications to try and make it safer for our first aiders. So what do they look like? Well, if they're not breathing normally, we're still going to call 999 because we still need that ambulance. That hasn't changed. The key change, though, is that what we're going to do is we're going to actually get a piece of cloth, a towel, a piece of clothing, something ideally not plastic, so something that's actually breathable or porous, and we're going to pop that over the casualty's nose and mouth. The idea here is that we're going to actually start our normal chest compressions at a rate of 100 to 120 beats per minute. So you remember that that's about 2 a second, or to the same beat to staying alive, for example. Now, the idea behind this is that when we're doing chest compressions, if you've ever done chest compressions, you'll realise that air will be moving out of the nose and out of the mouth. So the reason for putting a towel or a piece of clothing over their nose and mouth is just to try and prevent any potential fluids coming out of the mouth that we could potentially get on us or breathe in. During this period, we're not doing mouth to mouth. So we're doing what we call compression only CPR. Now, in normal times, that's kind of something that we would do if there's a really good reason why we couldn't do 30 compressions to 2 breaths. During COVID-19, ultimately, we're not doing any mouth to mouth on adults. If you have got a defibrillator, fantastic. The use of that isn't going to significantly increase the risk of infection. And ultimately, if you've been on a first aid course before, you know that really to have a good chance of success, we need a defibrillator on their chest within 10 to 12 minutes. So really, really, really important. Don't delay in using that defib. So just to quickly summarise there then, it's a really good time to actually start reviewing your first aid needs assessment. So it's something that all businesses need to do anyway, but now is a really good time to just have a look and make sure that you've got enough first aiders in place so that if somebody needs some first aid assistance, they get it immediately. If you've got first aiders in your workplace who have certificates that have expired either on or after the 16th of March, then you may well be able to rely on those certificates being extended. As we mentioned, it's really important though that all of these certificates are recertified, the people are requalified by the 30th of September at the absolute latest. Bearing in mind that there will be probably a rush on when people are coming towards those deadlines. So if you've got people that are coming up to their expiry dates, it's a really good time to try and get something booked in with your provider sooner rather than later, because people will be clambering over each other, guaranteed back end of September, looking for courses. If you're dealing with a casualty, try and get the casualty to help themselves as best as possible. If you can stay away from the casualty, then the chances of infection are greatly reduced. If you really can't do that and you need to get involved, then it's really important that you put a mask on, the first aider, pop some goggles on, or your safety glasses at least, and those gloves that we always use in first aid anyway. If you've got a conscious casualty, giving them goggles and a mask might not be a bad idea as well, and that's going to really help try to lower any chances of transmission. Another key point then, we're not going to be opening a casualty's airway if they are unresponsive, and we're not going to listen for breathing in the normal way. We're just going to, instead of look, listen and feel, we're going to look. If we need to do CPR, we're going to cover the nose and mouth before we start on the chest compressions. And remember, we're not going to actually be doing any mouth-to-mouth during this time. That hasn't gone away completely. So after the COVID pandemic has passed, we will be going back to 30 compressions and 2 breaths. Just to be clear, this is only during this current outbreak. Easy, I think. So I think we'll open the floor. If you've got any questions, then please just ask us, and we'll certainly do our best to answer them for you.
Thank you. That was really interesting. Can people do online training at this moment in time if they've got no previous qualifications in first aid?
So there's lots of online training courses in first aid available. Lots of them will tell you that they are worth a certain number of CPT points. The truth is, the Health and Safety Executive do not recognise any first aid courses that are delivered wholly online. So you can do what we might call blended learning, which means that you can do perhaps a third of a first aid course online, but the rest of it has to be done in a classroom face to face. And there's absolutely no way around that, which for me personally I agree with, because first aid is a really hands-on topic, and watching a couple of videos and doing a couple of quizzes really doesn't qualify anybody to be a really good first aider and actually save lives. So I'm pleased that the HSE haven't wavered on that.
It can only raise some awareness, but it can't embed the practical skills that people need.
Yeah. Great, thank you. If anyone has any more questions, oh, here we have one here. We have 6 first aiders as trained by yourselves actually, but we're all working remotely. We have 4 members of staff in the office not first aid trained. How should they go about getting them trained? Or is it advised that you should have somebody who is first aid trained in the office, or what is the best thing for this company?
So it's always wise to have people trained in first aid, because even if you work in an office, for example, and even if you're not really doing kind of really high hazard things, that doesn't stop people from having heart attacks. It doesn't stop people from going into cardiac arrest, having strokes, or anything else. If you were to follow the health and safety sort of legislation, you'd find that the HSE sort of demand that if somebody needs first aid in the workplace, no matter where that workplace is, that they should get first aid treatment immediately. Now, what that tells you is basically you should always have a first aider, at least a first aider around. However, if you look at their guidance documents, it sort of specifically tells you that actually, if you've got a really low risk environment, such as an office, and if there's not many people who work there, all you might need to actually kind of tick the box, shall we say, of being compliant, would be someone who can recognise that somebody might need some assistance and call 999. So whilst I think it's always prudent and good policy to actually have, you know, as many first aiders as possible, because you just never know when these things are going to happen. There's an argument to say that if you've got 4 people who are potentially in a low risk environment, that you wouldn't necessarily need to rush out and get a first aider if you're just trying to meet the legislation. If you want to make sure that everyone's as safe as they can be, then pop them on a first aid course, and we can recommend a really good company that does such things.
We are back up and running as well, with modifications in place. So yeah, the courses are COVID secure, but are still going to be useful and give people the skills and confidence that they need.
That's really helpful, thank you. Has anyone else got any more questions to ask? Obviously we can, are you happy for us to share the slides as well with a follow-up, and we'll obviously make sure we include your details in there, so if anybody does have any further questions afterwards, or wanting to pursue any training, then obviously they can get in touch with you.
Yeah, that's absolutely great.
We're happy to share some links as well, aren't we? Because we review information on our website regularly, so rather than just sort of sending out a static document that doesn't get updated, our website does, so we can provide those links as well.
Yeah, because these things, they're changing all the time. So we're kind of checking, you know, each and every day, multiple times a day. We're pulling information in from about 6 or 8 different sources. Not all of them agree with each other, shall we say, all of the time. So we're trying to keep people as up to date as possible, because it is quite a challenge just to keep on top of it. So yeah, I think those links would be quite useful.
That would be really useful, yeah. I guess things like the change in the R rate or things like that might all have different impacts on maybe what the guidance would be. And
definitely, I mean on Radio 4 this morning, they're talking about kind of the science pointing towards us only needing to keep it 1 metre away from each other. Obviously, we're not going down that route just yet, but that's probably next on the cards. And then as soon as kind of we stay 1 metre away from each other, then it's arguable that actually, well, generally at work we stay about 1 metre from each other anyway, don't we? Quite often. So yeah, these things are certainly changing all the time. I mean, we've got some details on the screen there. So there are our names if anybody wants to find us on LinkedIn. That's the website address there. Obviously, if you want any questions answered, we've got email address there. There's the phone number that'll take you directly through to Helena's extension. Follow us on Facebook or anything like that, because we are trying to keep people up to date as best we can. And yet we're not here to try and sell you anything. All right, we're happy to just provide as much information as you need so you can get back to work and do what you need. Of course, if you need any training, anything like that, then great. But first and foremost, we're very much here just for advice. If you need something, please just let us know.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So we'll send a follow-up to everyone afterwards. But once again, thank you to you both.
Well, you're more than welcome.
No, thanks very much for hosting.
It's been fun.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The figures were unreliable, insisting that it was adequate. Which is of Marmite. Shoppers can't find